I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and I have an expert to share with you today that I really had a lovely, robust conversation with on subjects that are near and dear to my heart. And I think he gave me some great answers that really translate into some very usable information for us. And ultimately, that's what I'm here to do, is to bring you great information that can improve the quality of your life. So please allow me to introduce Dr. David Rabin, MD, PhD. He's a neuroscientist, board-certified psychiatrist, health tech entrepreneur and inventor who has been studying the impact of chronic stress in humans for more than a decade. He's the co-founder and chief medical officer at Apollo Neuro, which has developed the first scientifically validated wearable technology that actively improves energy, focus, and relaxation using a novel touch therapy that signals safety to the brain. Dr. Dave has always been fascinated by consciousness and our inherent ability to heal ourselves from injury and illness. As such, he has specifically focused his research on the clinical translation of non-invasive therapies for patients with treatment-resistant illnesses like PTSD and substance use disorders. Now, Dr. Rabin and I had a conversation about all of these things and more. You know, something fun happens when brain nerds get together to talk about things. I'm going to refer to myself as a nerd. He can decide if he wants to call himself something else. So I love these moments because they're so juicy. And to speak to somebody who has such an in-depth knowledge of consciousness and the impacts of chronic stress on our bodies and our brains and resilience, it's, I think, really special. So we did talk about recovery and resilience and HRV. We did talk about trauma and psychedelic therapy and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, which he dropped a statistic that just blew my mind. He said that the research has shown that with 3 doses of MDMA, now I know that there are some other ravers out there that are listening to this going, isn't that what we used to call ecstasy? Oh, yes, it is. Now we call it MDMA. So 3 doses of MDMA in the research, along with psychotherapy, has shown complete regression of PTSD. Why? Because it signals safety to the brain, and the brain no longer has to stay in that loop of trauma. Now, when I heard this, when I heard him share this, I thought, my God, that's nothing short of revolutionary. And why do we not know more about this? So we talk about these things. And in fact, Dr. Rabin says that it is his research with MDMA that led him to start the Apollo Neuro Company, where he created a device, which I love, by the way. It's awesome. I've used it for the last 4 weeks or so, and I am utterly delighted at how much better I'm sleeping, how much more regulated my emotions are throughout the day, and simply by wearing this little device on my wrist. I happen to like it on my wrist, but Dr. Rabin was wearing his on his ankle, and just the regulation that comes from that is surprisingly efficient and I was just below perception. If I thought about it, I could feel it, but otherwise I can't feel it. It's really quite remarkable. We do talk about it at length in the show. He shared a story about how music changes our brains, and we know that. And we don't really know why. Neuroscience hasn't really shown us why, explained why this happens, but that the device itself is meant to replicate that. And as I was saying, it was in his research with MDMA that he said, how can we take this sort of calm, triggering safety mechanism that we get from MDMA and recreate it in a wearable device that doesn't have the side effects potentially. And so ultimately, that's what he did in the creation. He is the co-founder of Apollo Neuro. He also talked about how Apollo helps with sleep, etc., especially a very special feature that he and his wife developed when she was having difficulty sleeping through the night. And you listening to the show, you know very well this is a very, very common side effect of menopause and perimenopause in particular. And so they came up with a solution to that unwanted middle of the night wake up. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful conversation. I learned so much. And probably my favorite moment was when I asked him, knowing that we get stuck in ruts, cognitive ruts, if you will, that keep us in patterns that encourage anxiety and depression, and how we can break out of those ruts. And I asked him, knowing what he's learned about how human beings think and consciousness and all of the things that he has expertise in, how does he encourage his own brain health and neuroplasticity? So I encourage you to listen in for that, what he answers, because I tell you, the way he answered, I'm like, oh, I'm writing this stuff down because I'm going to want to reference this for my own wellness and mental health. So I hope you enjoy this episode and this conversation as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. Without further ado, here is my interview with Dr. David Rabin. It's important to me that the supplements I use are of the highest quality, and that's why for more than 3 years I've been drinking AG1. It is researched and developed by an in-house team of scientists, doctors, and nutritionists with decades of experience in their respective fields. Quality for AG1 isn't just a buzzword. It's a commitment backed by expert-led scientific research, high-quality ingredients, and rigorous testing. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because they obsess over product quality, the standards of manufacturing partners, and sustainable practices. It's easy and fast to use. Drinking AG1 mixed with water in 1 scoop a day covers my nutritional bases. Prebiotics, probiotics, digestive enzymes for gut support, B vitamins and rhodiola for energy support, folate, magnesium, and ashwagandha for stress support, and vitamin C and zinc for my immune health. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D plus K2 and 5 free travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. That's drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. Okay, Dr. David Rabin, welcome to the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. You and I have such a treasure trove of goodies to talk about. It's hard for me to know after reading your bio where to start, but I will start with this for my community listening. You're a PhD neuroscientist. You're an MD psychiatrist. You're an inventor and entrepreneur and a psychedelics enthusiast and researcher. I love all of this. Can you tell me how you found yourself here?
Sure. So when I was a kid, I had, it started My fascination with the brain started pretty young because between the ages of 4 and 7 or so, I was having, really vivid dreams, which at the time I had no idea that those were pretty common in kids. But when I was a kid, I just knew that my dreams felt real. And as I got older, and throughout my childhood, I started to notice myself referencing things that happened in my dreams, like conversations or experiences I had with my brothers or with a friend. And then I would mention that in our regular conversations in waking life, and they would have no idea what I was talking about. And so I started to wonder, oh, well, that must have happened in a dream, must not have happened with us in our waking reality. So as I started to get older into this, 7, 8, 9 year old, I started to ask my parents about dreams because I was interested in what they were, and I started to occasionally have bad dreams, and those were scary. And so, I think my parents, like many parents, to try to, calm me and make me not afraid of sleep, said, "Oh, dreams aren't real. They can't hurt you. Don't worry about it." That sat okay for a short time, and then I continued to have vivid dreams, and as I continued to have them, they still felt real. And so it started to make me question naturally, what does the word real mean? Right? If these feel real and they feel as real as when we're awake, but the adults say that what's happening in our dreams is not real, then maybe they're mistaken about what the word real means. Right. And so I started to get really interested in that. And that's kind of where my interest in consciousness started. And then from there, I just started reading a lot of science fiction, reading as much, neuroscience for young people that was available, which was not much at the time, and just trying to understand as much as I could about the brain, the way we make meaning about the world, about dreams, about sleep, and stress, and trying to sort all of that stuff out. And as I got older, I really wanted to study consciousness, and I've always wanted to study meaning making and the way we think about the world. But that was a really challenging subject to your career into back, in the early aughts. And so, as I was in my early medical career, I was very fortunate to have a lot of great mentors and advisors who said, hey, I get that you want to study all this stuff and it's really exciting, but we don't really have any good ways to study that yet. And so you're probably not going to have much of a career. And so I thought, okay, well, if I have to sacrifice this for now, I will, and I'll study something that's adjacent to it, which is stress, because stress changes the way we make meaning of the world. And when you're more stressed, people tend to have more wild and crazy dreams, and it impacts the way you feel in your regular life and how you understand whether something in your regular life is safe or threatening or joyful or upsetting. And that stress is really important. So I ended up focusing on chronic stress, and I studied that in my neuroscience PhD and throughout most of medical school with respect to aging disorders in the brain and the eye. And then around 2012, there was a lot more psychedelic research that started to come out. And I was working with a lot of mental health patients who were struggling with severe mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and worse. And many of them were really struggling to recover. And as I started to look at some of this research that one of my good friends, sent me uh, around some of the best publications back in 2012 on the benefits or potential benefits of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy to treat mental illness, it really seemed paradigm shifting to the field, and that just one to 12 doses of medicine rather than taking medicine every day for life could actually induce long-standing benefits if you combine it with therapy. And so that really shook things up for me. And very, very quickly after reading that, I realized that psychedelic medicines were a clear path to studying consciousness and meaning making in the whole person, and especially in people struggling with mental illness. And so, shortly after reading those publications, I, switched my trajectory to studying psychedelics and mental health and as a focus, and here we are.
Wow. So consciousness is where it started. And now you're focused on the psychedelics piece, or at least your research has those flavors to it. Have you come back to the place that you had to leave behind?
Oh yeah, completely. And that's what I think is so fascinating about the psychedelic medicine space is that, we are really limited in the scientific world by, and as humans in general, by the language that we use to describe our experiences. So at best, language is really a imperfect way of describing what it is that we're experiencing, like
Mhm.
feelings, right? Feelings are so much more complicated than the words we give them, right? There's so much
Mhm.
more behind sadness than just the word sadness. It's everything else that comes with it. And so as I started to see the reports and the impact that some of the psychedelic medicine therapies were having in patients with severe depression, what was really fascinating was even from the earliest days of this research going back 50 years, into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I guess 70 years, what people have reported is that their perspective on themselves has changed. So there's a shift in the way people see themselves and the way they see the world and the meaning that they have about themselves and the meaning they make about the world. And to me, that is consciousness at its essence, right? That is when we're shifting people's perception, and it sticks around for the long term. And it can be from just one experience, which was really phenomenal, and something we've never seen before. So as I started to see that, it became very clear that what psychedelic medicines were doing, which is actually goes back to Dr. Stan Grof, who was one of the most famous psychiatrists to work with psychedelics back in probably starting in the 50s. I think he's in his 90s now. And he coined the phrase that psychedelic medicines are non-specific amplifiers of awareness, meaning they increase our awareness to everything we're not normally aware of. So right now everybody's aware of our conversation and maybe the color of the light in the room and maybe the temperature of the room, but you're not really thinking about much anything else. There's a million billion things going on underneath the surface that we are not aware of, from our past thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, the feeling of our clothes on our body, everything else that's happening, the noises outside the house, the room, right? All of that's still happening, but we're not aware of it because our conscious attention is focused on whatever it is we're paying attention to right now. Psychedelic medicines have this way of almost like helping us lift the hood of our awareness and see underneath the surface to what Freud called the subconscious, Carl Jung, they called the subconscious space, the unconscious space, which is all of the rest of the iceberg, the 100 million things that are going on in our lives that we can pay attention to that we were not necessarily taught were there. And guess what happens when you're dreaming? Same thing. Dreams are when we are asleep, our survival brain turns off and we start to become aware of things that are in our subconscious and our unconscious, and then that comes to the surface and gets integrated into the way we know and think about the world. So psychedelic medicines in large part can be simplified in terms of their effect to what could be similar to like a waking dream state that lasts for a certain amount of time. And when you can put somebody into that state for a certain amount of time, all of a sudden you get exposure to all the subconscious and unconscious material that can help people heal. And so
Right.
that to me was like seeing a tool and getting exposed to a tool that can allow us to actually access altered states of consciousness for the purposes of healing that was similar to dreams, was taking me all the way back to the beginning. So I found myself full circle.
Certainly, certainly. It's revolutionary looking at how psychedelic medicine can fit into what we think about the brain and consciousness, et cetera. And I think it's Robin Carhart Harris's quote when he says that the psychedelics move us out of the ruts of our brain, like it's like lubricating cognition. And of course, we know about the disconnection of the default mode network and these sorts of things that are part of the how the psychedelics work. By the way, Dr. Rabin, we do talk about psychedelics on this show. I've had other people come on and talk about it. So my listeners are somewhat aware of how psilocybin in particular is what we talk about on the show or have discussed. But I understand that your research interest is in MDMA. Now, let me put a pin in that and come back to something I've just said to you. This lubrication of cognition, how useful is that? It's extraordinarily useful, right? Because when we see, I mean, you can tell me your experience in working with your patients is that we very much get stuck in these ruts and these patterns of behavior that we can't break out of, or we feel like we can't break out of. And at the tools that we've had until very recently have been pretty crummy, to be honest. I mean, an SSRI might get you out of a crisis, but it's not really healing anything unless you have a serotonin deficiency. So I just want to thank you for having that expansive awareness that allows you to go, let's find something better.
Oh yeah, of course. That's the benefit of a research mindset, is always trying to look for better tools for our patients. And it's interesting to think about these different paradigms of the way we treat people or have treated people, because the SSRI medications and other antidepressant medications do have benefit, but their benefit is focused around stability. And the goal is when somebody comes into your office completely unstable, that you can give them one of these prescription medications and get them relatively more stable relatively quickly. And that is a really great tool to have. That being said, they don't work for everyone. They have side effects. They Because they're stabilizers, it works like a band-aid, right? So if you have a broken leg, or if you have a bad cut on your leg and you just put a band-aid on it, but you don't do anything else to help it heal, like get stitches or clean out the wound or any of those other things, then you will not be as aware that you have a cut, but your cut will still be there. And it might actually get infected and get worse, right? So the band-aid doesn't actually solve the problem. It just creates a little bit of stabilization of the problem. When you start taking those medications for life, that's when people start to see more side effects from SSRI and other antidepressants, because they're not really meant to be taken for life. And the reason why people take them for life is because they're not actually getting a solution to the core issue, which is often trauma related.
Mhm.
It's not a serotonin imbalance. And most of the studies that have been done to date that have tried to evaluate whether there's a genetic or hereditary inborn serotonin imbalance in people with depression have proven to be negative.
Mhm.
So that's really important to note, because if we were born depressed, it's a lot harder to fix, and we require the medication for life to fix it. But if we're not born with depression, we're born ourselves, and then we experience trauma, and it's our response to the traumatic events or the challenging events where we weren't supported afterwards that then result in a change in the way our brains or parts of our brains are talking to each other around self identity, right? Like if something bad happens to me and I get blamed for it, even though it wasn't my fault, then by the people I respect, when I'm asking for support, then that's going to harden the trauma in my brain and make me think, well, what's wrong with me that I put myself in danger?
Mhm.
How can I possibly keep myself safe in the future if I could put myself in danger in this situation?
Mhm.
Right? And all of those thoughts are negative, self-trusting thoughts. They're literally thoughts that are stemming from this fractured sense of self-trust, which is effectively the core injury of trauma. And trauma can look like lots of different things. It can look like depression, it can look like anxiety, it can look like PTSD, schizophrenia, it can look like chronic pain, it can look like fibromyalgia, right? We see trauma manifesting in all these different ways, but the medications we use don't actually get to the core. So they just stabilize. So psychedelics are so interesting, and I actually conduct research on a lot of different psychedelic medicines. Ketamine and MDMA are amongst the most interesting because we have the largest studies of patients in those groups. But I'm fascinated by and I'm collaborating with folks working on psilocybin and mushroom treatments, as well as ayahuasca and other tribal treatments, because my interest is how are they similar, right? How are they all, if they're all used to treat trauma? Whether you go to modern MDMA therapy or modern ketamine therapy, or you go to ancient ayahuasca therapy or ancient psilocybin therapy, and you talk to the people who are delivering those treatments, all of the people say that the medicine works by helping people overcome the impact of past trauma on the body. So the medicine is actually helping us with the therapy, not the medicine alone, but the medicine with the therapy guidance that creates a safe container for the experience, allows people to amplify the safety. So the medicine is like a molecular amplifier of safety in the body that allows us to feel safe enough to remake meaning around past traumatic events.
That's huge.
It's huge. It's completely paradigm shifting for the field of medicine and psychiatry, and that's why we think like equivalent to comparable to like the discovery of antibiotics for infection, right?
Yes.
Infection was a terminal illness before we discovered antibiotics and commercialized them. All of a sudden, Alexander Fleming discovers penicillin synthetically. We commercialize it. Infections are no longer leading cause of death, right? And morbidity. Same thing with mental illness. Mental illness is considered incurable in the United States right now. We have no treatments that we are allowed to use as clinicians that are considered to be cures. We're not even supposed to use the word. And now we're on the cusp of actually getting treatments over the line with the FDA that are getting people closer to a cure for mental illness, like an antibiotic effect, than we've ever seen in the history of psychiatry. So it cannot be understated how impactful these medicines are to the field, to the way we think about the brain, and how parts of our brains are talking to each other, and also how much this impacts patients' lives in moving forward.
You say that, and I feel like I want to weep with, I don't know, probably empathy, excitement for all of the people that I've ever worked with in my container here in my clinic that need the help that I've felt, that my family's felt, that my friends have felt. There's so many of us. Just the other day here in Calgary, we learned that the major highway had shut down in the middle of rush hour traffic. Figure it's a traffic accident. No, the police called it a mental health incident. So what the rumor has been is that somebody ended their life in a tragic way. And I just think we have to be able to do better. People cannot suffer like that. I really get passionate about this one. And perhaps that's why I get as excited about psychedelics as you do, because the potential of it for human evolution, especially around these gigantic frontal lobes we've evolved, I think is really important. And I don't think it's an accident that Mother Nature has given us these plant medicines, if you will. Although let's go there. So can you give us a little bit of information about what is a psychedelic? Because something like MDMA, ketamine are not plant medicines per se; they're lab created versus psilocybin or ayahuasca. Please share.
Sure. So psychedelic really means to reveal the mind. So psyche means mind, delos means to show or to reveal. So we're talking about experiences, not drugs. The term psychedelic just applies to an experience where parts of our minds that we were not aware of before are revealed to us. So I always like to start there because that takes drugs out of the picture.
Mm.
So psychedelic is a term that just applies to experience. So that means that you can have a psychedelic experience, as many people have, in a dream, right? If you're having a dream, that is a psychedelic experience. And it probably is going along with a burst of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the most natural psychedelic in the world, which is in ayahuasca, but and in all plants and animals, but it gets secreted by the pineal gland in the center of our brains that also makes melatonin. And that gland secretes DMT at different times of our lives. And dreams are thought to be one of those times, as is birth and death. And so that is fundamentally from the way we're describing it and the way it's been described, that is a psychedelic state that we've all had. These are not things to be afraid of. Other ways that people access these states, deep meditative states, yoga, flow states with exercise can be considered psychedelic for people, playing music or listening to music, sound baths, massage, soothing touch, right? All of these things can induce a altered state of consciousness in the body that can make us feel safe and change the way that we perceive ourselves. So those I would consider to be the premise and the fundamental, even breath work, right? The fundamental basis of psychedelic states. It's not drug related. So then you get into the plants, right? And the plants are the oldest way that we have accessed psychedelic states with a substance. And this includes things like cannabis and high THC containing cannabis is potently psychedelic. Things like sassafras, which is a plant that MDMA actually is extracted from originally, ayahuasca, psilocybin containing mushrooms, peyote and mescaline, and those kinds of cacti, right? These are all indigenous plants that have been used for, in many cases, thousands of years in traditional and tribal settings to facilitate individual and group access to psychedelic states, to altered states of consciousness, mind revealing states. And that's the history. So this has been around for a long time. And believe it or not, most people don't know the history of cannabis, but cannabis has been used as a therapeutic agent in Western medicine as a staple, as a mainstay of Western medicine up until about 1920, when prohibition for alcohol failed. The U.S. Department that was governing prohibition needed a new target, and they chose cannabis. Otherwise, they would have lost their jobs. So this has been very political for a very long time. And the doctors at the time said, no, 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 you cannot do this. If you do this, then the medical community will be disconnected from this treatment, and we will not be able to use cannabis as a treatment anymore for all these different conditions that we're currently using it for. And guess what happened? They said, no, don't worry, that's never going to happen. And within about 5 or 10 years, cannabis was completely eliminated from the pharmacopoeia, no longer taught in medical training, and it was just never used anymore, and it became eventually Schedule 1 and prohibited. So and now it's, all of these medicines are starting to enter back into society because people are hungry for anything that works. And if I think one of the biggest deficits that we have as a society, right, and a community right now is hope. And when you've been trying, hope is fundamentally healing. So if you're suffering with anything and you're trying treatment after treatment after treatment that the doctors and the people you trust and you're told to trust have said, this is going to work for you, and then it doesn't, right? And then you try another and it doesn't, you try another and it doesn't. You also start to ask the question of yourself, well, what's wrong with me that I am not responding to these, right? Am I so sick? Is there something so wrong with me that I will never get better? And that is the wrong question. The right question is this the right treatment for what I actually have going on? And that's where psychedelic medicines become so interesting, or altered states of consciousness in general become interesting, is because they are working to effectively do what you described earlier, which is help us get out of the think outside the box, right? So if you imagine that probably most humans are living their entire lives from the moment they're children through their entire adult life with a very thick cardboard box on their heads that comprises every single thing they know and were taught about the world. And so when you enter a psychedelic state with or without drugs, it's just like lifting that box off for a minute, right? And then that box is off, and you're like, oh, there are actually other ways to think about things. There are other ways to think about myself. There are other things going on that I might have been missing. And so it's really these are really powerful consciousness and thinking tools that have to be used properly, of course, but they are very powerful in actually helping us, like, literally step outside the box and think outside the box, and even recognize that there's a box there so that we can do it more on a regular basis without the medicines required. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm wondering, as I hear you say that, knowing what you know, what do you do to encourage your own neuroplasticity to make sure you don't get stuck in the cardboard box? And maybe you're doing it with your kids if you've got kids or family members. Talk about that a little bit, please.
Sure. I think the main thing, there's a lot of lessons we can learn from ancient traditions and also from, the work with psychedelic medicines. I think the main thing is don't make assumptions and question everything, right? Like it doesn't mean that what we were taught growing up was wrong, but it means it might not be right. So if we don't know it's wrong, but it might not be right, let's experiment, right? Let's think about it. Let's treat ourselves like the most awesome research and discovery lab that we've ever had the privilege of working in, right? Like we have the opportunity to test prior assumptions. So for instance, so many of us are taught that we are not worthy of love and affection growing up, right? The way we are, there's something wrong with us. Maybe it's because we were picked on. Maybe it's because people didn't treat us well growing up. Maybe people ignored us or neglected us. But oftentimes, many people get taught, hey, I'm not worthy of love or affection or attention in a positive way because of the way that people treated me. And so that's something that gets taught to us. And that comes along with a whole bunch of stuff about what you're capable of, right? And what your potential is in this life as a human being. Many people think their potential is very limited. They think that there's not that much they can achieve. They can only achieve the, you know, regular American dream with a partner and 2 to 3 kids and a job that pays well enough and those kinds of things, working for somebody else. People don't realize they can start their own business, right? They don't have to have a family in the traditional way. They can do whatever they want. They can become experts in any different kind of field. Um, but it starts with asking the question, right? And this is the question I start out almost every single therapy session with new patients is it possible that what you were taught about yourself and the world is not the full story? And every single person can say, yes, it's possible, right? That's all it is, just accepting a possibility. It's not saying yes or no for sure. It's just saying, is it possible? And when people can ask themselves that question and answer, yes, it's possible, this isn't the full story, then you start to really get an interest in diving in and understanding what that full story is. And that's what those cognitive techniques are really the foundation of understanding that there's a whole lot more out there than just this, right? And then the practices that reinforce that are intentional breathing, movement, intentional movement exercise, yoga, singing, empathy, soothing touch, right? All these kinds of healing practices from the ancient traditions are actually still the very same practices that reinforce that sense of self self control, awareness expansion, safety, calm, and just feeling comfortable in your own body with what you've got.
Wow. You're a modern day Yoda for all of that. Thank you.
You're too kind.
Mitochondrial health is a critical piece of longevity and aging well. But where do we learn how to take care of our mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell, providing us energy and strength. Mitochondria are in every cell in our body, our brain, and our muscles. Menopause is a time of reduced energy, causing fatigue, muscle loss, brain fog, changes to skin appearance and body composition, reduction in strength and endurance. These changes aren't just annoyances, they can seriously impact overall health and longevity. I get help with this using MitoPure from Timeline Nutrition. It's a clinically tested urolithin A supplement that rejuvenates the mitochondria. These innovative products use this natural compound to trigger an anti aging pathway in our cells called mitophagy. The research behind MitoPure is robust and impressive. I feel stronger and more energetic since taking the MitoPure soft gels. I've seen the science, and I rest well knowing how MitoPure is working to rejuvenate my mitochondria. The serum leaves my skin smooth and hydrated, and I've seen the fine lines around my eyes and forehead get softer with my very first use. It's a moisturizing powerhouse with longevity benefits. Yes, please. Timeline is offering our community 10% off your first order of MitoPure. Visit timeline.com/lovely to learn more. That's timeline.com/lovely. timeline.com/lovely. Okay, I have a quote. I want to pivot a little bit. And thank you for that. I reckon I could clip what you just said down to about 2 minutes and save myself and a whole lot of people years of therapy. So I don't know if that was your goal or not, but I'd say that's where you went with that.
Awesome. That would be great.
Yeah, wouldn't it be awesome? I know. This is the thing. Okay, so I have a quote from you that I'd like to read. You say touch is often overlooked in stress management, despite its ability to signal safety to the body and reduce stress. Is this the place where you came up with the Apollo Neuro? Please tell me
Yeah.
about that, please.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by in mental health and psychiatry, we call it somatosensory stimulation. So it's stimulation of the body senses. So sight, smell, touch, taste, sound, right? Our five physical senses. touch always stood out to me as a fascinating sense because it almost I mean, especially in children, it's universally calming. And if you and what's interesting is it predates the calming benefits of touch predate humans. So it goes back, if you go back into the evolutionary biology, into ancient mammals that are 50, 100 million years old, the very first mammals that or animals that nursed their young after birth, right? Every single one of those animals, one of the very first things they do as soon as the newborn pops out is they snuggle the newborn and then they feed the newborn, which requires this intense, very, very tight level of touch. And it's immediately soothing to the newborn. And we do this still with our children in the hospital with our newborns. We do this regularly. It's considered a mainstay of health. And so this always really fascinated me. This is an ancient understanding of you know how touch impacts the body biologically. And when I started to study MDMA assisted therapy, this goes back to between 2012 and 2016. I was really interested in how MDMA assisted therapy was getting these, 60, 70, 80% response and remission rates for people with, sometimes lifelong PTSD, but on average about 17.6 years of untreatable PTSD. People are getting dramatic long term benefit with just 3 doses of medicine and therapy. And so I said, all right, I got to figure out how this is working. So I met Rick Doblin in person for the first time. It might have been 2015, 2016. And then he allowed me and 3 of my colleagues in psychiatry to get MDMA trained. And from that training, what I realized very clearly was that the entire training was based on safety. So every single piece of the training was founded in helping the client feel safe and in the therapy environment long before we ever administer the medicine. And then you administer the medicine, and the medicine is amplifying that safety. So going back to what Stan Groff said, psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers of awareness. So if you're coming into a psychedelic therapy session with MDMA and the background baseline foundation of what you're entering in on is, I feel safe with these people. I feel safe with these therapists. I know that I'm not judged, and anything that I say or do is acceptable here and they'll take care of me. Then what the MDMA does is it molecularly boosts the activation of those safety cascades in the brain. And that affects the amygdala. It decreases amygdala activity in the fear center. It increases emotional cortex activity in the positive centers, the joy centers, the centers involved in empathy and feeling comfortable and safe. And so when you think about that, it really hit home to this interest I had in therapeutic touch from long before, because touch for me, in my own personal experience of receiving soothing touch from my parents, from others in my life, partners, and with my seeing the impact of touch in my patients' lives with their families, with their service animals, and then also seeing the literature on it, it was very, very clear in the science that people experiencing soothing touch are activating very similar parts of their brain as MDMA, and it's completely natural. So why wouldn't we start to explore that as a therapeutic modality? And so the problem with that is that touch from another human is highly discouraged in the medical and mental health field. We do almost, unless you're an energy worker or a massage therapist, basically don't do any soothing touch with our patients, and it's highly discouraged, especially in mental health. And so we thought, well, if touch is highly therapeutic, but we're not supposed to give it of ourselves to a patient, perhaps we could use technology to give people some of that benefit on the go. And so we started exploring technological ways to activate the touch pathway. And then we figured out that you could do it with electricity, you could do it with sound. And sound vibration is one of the is turned out to be in our lab studies at the University of Pittsburgh much more effective at inducing that safety state in the brain, which also increased heart rate variability, it increased vagal tone, it increased cognitive performance, physical recovery, and it started to reduce people's trauma symptoms. And that was fascinating. And so as we started to see that, we saw touch, even though it wasn't from a person, it was from a device like the Apollo that you're wearing on your wrist that I'm wearing on my ankle. that just that alone, delivered in the right way, was enough to send the signals to the brain that the brain needed to feel and understand, to know, hey, I'm safe right now. I don't need my threat response, my fight or flight response to be going off. I'm just sitting at home with my family, or I'm just checking out at the grocery store, driving a car to work. I don't need to be in a fight or flight situation. I can be in my recovery, calm, restorative nervous system, the parasympathetic vagal nervous system. And that's what touch does. And that's what MDMA does long term. And so we're actually seeing that you could start to replicate some of these very powerful safety benefits that we get from psychedelic assisted therapy with technology that has no side effects and requires no drugs to be taken. And you can use it as often as you want, any age. And that was really, really exciting. And then we commercialized that and released it as the Apollo wearable product that you're wearing in 2020.
And I love it. I have to say, I think I'm very aware of vagal stimulation, HRV recovery, the safety mechanisms, because of the work I do with head injury. That's a big part of what I do. Is I have to
Huge.
help people see that, right? I
Yeah.
have to get them to see that the world is actually profoundly safe, but the injury is making them perceive things very differently. And so I was unsure as to how this was going to go, but I've been wearing it about a month now. And I have to say, I'm a huge fan. Like I'm surprised at just how level it's made me during the day. I have to ask you, what's your favorite vibe? I must know.
I think my favorite vibe is probably the social vibe. I because I so when we first started making wearable prototypes of the products, this is back in 2018, we were all testing it on ourselves and our friends and family, and we just, we have a couple distant family members who have autism and autism spectrum disorder, and folks who have social anxiety. And so we put it on them, and it had a rapid response. Like, they were just so calm so quickly, making eye contact and having conversations in ways they weren't before. And I was like, this is really different. And I've
There's
never
something
seen
here.
anything like
Yeah.
this. So that was really cool. And then for me personally, as I started to test Apollo more, I had to speak about it more, and I had a little bit of public speaking anxiety from the past that was unresolved, and I never had a good solution for it. But I started wearing the Apollo on the social vibe when I was speaking, and it instantly, from the first day that I did it, gave me this what we call like a mindful moment, where I was on stage or walking up on stage, and I was thinking, I noticed how much of my brain capacity, my attention, was thinking about what other people were thinking about me when I was coming on stage, or that I might make a mistake. And what happens if I make a mistake? What do I do? Or what if I forget what I'm going to say? Right? Or all those things. And then I was like, I started to ask myself, how much of my brain is attending to these thoughts of failure? And it was like easily over 60%, easily, maybe closer to 70% of my
Mhm.
brain's attention was on messing up, or what to do if I messed up, or what other people were thinking about me.
Mhm.
And so in that mindful moment, I recognized, because we have control over our attention, we just do. That's part of being human. So I thought, well, if all of the attention literature is true and I have control over my attention, then if I don't want to pay attention to my potential failure, I can direct my attention to speaking and just being here to speak, because that's what everybody's here to hear me do. I've
Mhm.
spoken 100 times, 1,000 times about this topic. Everybody, I know what I'm saying, right? I don't have any lack of confidence in my ability to convey this information clearly, that I know what I'm talking about. So why am I spending all this, giving all my precious brain resources away to thinking about failure? And that just that means there's 50% less of my brain, or 60% less, to actually focus on giving the talk, which means I'm going to give that much worse of a talk. So as I started to like rationalize this in this first time on stage with Apollo, in this mindful moment, I was like, wow, I have a whole lot more control over this than I thought. And I gave a much better talk that day. I was very present. I was very much in the moment. I wasn't concerned or worried at all. And over time, as I continued to use it, I completely eliminated my social anxiety and all of my public speaking anxiety. And so for me, the social vibe has a very special place in my heart. But I use all of them regularly, and I have them running on a schedule to kind of like keep my sleep and my sleep and my energy circadian rhythms regulated.
It's surprising how much of a difference it makes with sleep and the deepness of sleep, but
Right.
also the recovery and the HRV. Like I wear the Aura as well, and so I'm able to monitor that. And it's surprising just so you're really onto something with this. I'm so glad you invented it. Thank you for putting it out there. If anybody listening wants to know more about the Apollo wearable, there will be a link for you in the show notes that you can check out. I love it. I would say I think Calm is probably my favorite, but when I'm with patients, I throw on the Social Vibe, and it's just like it's a party in this room.
Right. Yeah.
For years, patients have called it the Lovely Lounge. It literally becomes that. You're gonna need a liquor license or something. Dancers next. Anyways, I can so relate to what you were saying about the public speaking, because you know that moment when you're walking on the stage, there's so many voices that can come in. There's that limbic hijacking that happens, right? You're about to screw it up, and you're gonna fall on your face, and everyone's gonna think you're full. Whatever. I've done lots of public speaking as well, and it doesn't matter how many times you've done it, that voice might get quieter the longer you do it. So tell me, Dr. Rabin, I'm supposed to put it on the Social Vibe when I'm doing a lecture. Is that right?
That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
I still use it on that vibe most of the time for like running a webinar, interviews, social like lectures, things like that. And I find it really effective. And a lot of people are using it for social anxiety, even just going out with friends after COVID, the social vibe was a huge boost because when you haven't been around people for a long time, you start to have that little voice that you were just
Mm,
mentioning about, you know, how do people think, what are people thinking about me, or am I coming off the right way? Those kind of things. The self-doubt gets louder, right?
yeah.
And then as you start to get comfortable in social situations, it gets quieter and you build confidence. But for a lot of people, being isolated socially for so long was very challenging, and then getting
Mhm.
back into socializing again was even more challenging. And so that's been really, really helpful to for folks in the moment with that kind of issue. But to your point, the improvement in sleep and HRV and
Mhm.
depth of sleep is really the crux of where all this is at, because when we're sleeping, like, sleep is the foundation of health, mental, physical, emotional health. Sleep is the foundation. So if we're not getting good, deep, restful sleep at night, then we're not going to function very well during the day. And we're going to often require more stimulants in the morning, and then more uh, sedatives in the night because we took stimulants in the morning. They're still active in our system when we're trying to go to bed. And it creates this kind of vicious Elvis diet like cycle that none of us want to be on or should
Mhm.
be on. And so it's fine to drink coffee and alcohol sometimes, but to rely on them, right? Or to rely on stimulants or to rely on sedatives is a very slippery slope that we want to avoid. And so being able to replace all of those things with a tool like this that's helping me teaching me how to regulate my own energy and my own sleep more effectively has just been, you know, life changing for us.
Yes.
And I mean, we've used this almost every day for the last 5 years, since we had our earliest prototype. So I'm so glad to hear that you're enjoying it. It's music to my ears.
I absolutely love it, and there's been so many benefits. I'm still figuring it all out. There's vibes I haven't tried yet. Can you speak to the vibes just so the listeners know what we're talking about?
Sure. Apollo is like music for your body. Anybody who's listening to this has probably had an experience where you walk into a room and or you get into your car, you've been having a kind of a crummy day, and then one of your favorite songs comes on and you almost instantly feel better, right? So that
Yeah.
you've had that, yeah, like
Oh
that's
yeah.
almost a universal human experience. That has never been really well explained by neuroscience. We know it works, we know it impacts almost everyone in the same way, but we don't know why. And having those experiences many, many times over really made me think about the impact of music on the body. And so when we thought about Apollo and touch, we thought, well, maybe the touch receptors in our bodies are actually capable of receiving music, right, in similar way that our ears do, and maybe that can be calming or energizing depending on how fast or slow that body music is. And so we started working with audible music that you hear, and then we edited it and transposed it down into a frequency range that is more like what comes out of a subwoofer, so those big deep bass speakers. And so you can't really hear it anymore. Like with Apollo, you can't really hear it, but you can feel it. And anybody who wants to feel Apollo and try it, if you have an iPhone, you can actually try it for free on your iPhone right now. Just go to the App Store, type in Apollo Neuro, 2 words, and download the purple Apollo Neuro app. And then you can just open it up and hit Feel Apollo on the screen, and your phone will start vibrating with one of the Apollo vibes. So you can get a feeling of what it's like. And I can guarantee you've never felt anything like this come out of your iPhone before. But that vibration is this very gentle, soothing wave of vibration that can be turned up or turned down depending on what kind of energy state you're in and what you want to be in. So we have vibes for energy, we have like espresso feel like feelings, we have vibes for focus, for socializing, we have vibes for recovery, and then we have which are just like just even keeled. Recovery feels kind of like 5 minutes of moderate breathing. And then we have more deeper, calming, relaxing vibes, which would be the calm, which also enhances meditative access to meditative states. We have unwind, which is great for anything before bed. And most people use that right before they get into bed. And then sleep, which is what most people use when they get into bed. And you can either select them anytime you want just by going on the app and just clicking a vibe, or the app will schedule them for you and turn them on automatically to regulate your sleep and wake cycles throughout the day and night. So that's how we typically recommend people use it, because then you get woken up in the morning with a gentle vibration that gives you energy, but it's not anxiety provoking, and you feel calm but energized in the morning. And then Apollo turns on automatically to help you feel focused and clear throughout the day. And then it winds you down after work to go home, and then it winds you down after dinner to go to bed, and then repeat, right? And what we know from sleep research is if you can do that sleep cycle steadiness, where you're falling asleep at roughly the same time every night and waking up at roughly the same time every morning, and you do that for about 21 days, you'll see a statistically significant improvement in your sleep and possibly other areas of your life. And that's exactly how long it takes for Apollo to induce the same kind of response. It's about 21 days of daily use. So that's really, really interesting. And all the vibes kind of work together in that way to help guide you through the day and night.
So it's learning as I wear it. Yes, it's learning about me and my rhythms.
If you use Smart Vibes, which is the add-on AI feature, this is the new feature we released last October, November, then that AI feature as an add-on subscription will be learning about you and customizing to you and turning on automatically day and night. If you're just using the basic app that just you download from the App Store without the subscription, which is the subscription's like the brain. If you're just using the basic, then you have to you set it yourself. You program it manually, and there's no AI. But with the AI, it does learn about you, and then it customizes and personalizes to you and improves your responses over time.
Okay. So sleep is one of the most important subjects I talk about on the show because it is one of the top three most common symptoms of menopause for women.
Yeah.
So anything that we can do to help make sleep better for us, tell us about the stay asleep vibe or the stay asleep function that comes along with I believe it's with the subscription. Yes.
Yes, with Smart Vibes. So this has actually been a game changer for many, many women with menopause because of the disturbances in the middle of the night, and not just difficulty falling asleep. Apollo, even in the basic version, will help you fall asleep, but there's never been a solution to unwanted middle of the night wake ups. There's never been a solution. Never in the history of psychiatry, in medicine, in sleep medicine, we have never had a solution that prevents unwanted middle of the night wake ups. And this is one of the biggest problems in people who are struggling with sleep. It's estimated something like 50 to 60% of people at least who have insomnia are not just having trouble falling asleep, but they're having trouble staying asleep. And so we thought, well, what is AI really good at? It's really good at tracking us when we're unconscious and then doing something when we're unconscious. So if
Mhm.
we're tracking your sleep with Apollo, which we are, and then we can predict when you're sleeping deeply, when you're sleeping restlessly and about to wake up, and when you're awake, then when you start to sleep restlessly, we can train your Apollo to turn on automatically before you wake up and prevent the wake up from even happening in the first place. And that was a really interesting experiment we started a few years ago, mainly because we saw this as a huge problem in public health, but also because when we started this business, my wife is the CEO and co-founder, and Catherine, and she stopped sleeping through the night when we started working together on this because it is a very demanding job. And uh, so we thought, well, why don't we try to fix this problem? And so we trained Apollo to do this, and we released it in October, November. And to give you an idea of how impactful this has been, we now have over 8,000 people using this feature, this subscription AI feature. And with regular Apollo use, so no subscription, no AI, you just buy it, you're using Apollo the regular old way, we're seeing people get like 30, sometimes 40 more minutes of sleep a night, depending on the person, when that's concentrated in deep and REM sleep. When people use the AI that prevents the unwanted wake ups, especially if you're a person who has a lot of unwanted wake ups, we see those people getting 60 more minutes of sleep a night that's concentrated in deep and REM. So
Yeah.
you're doubling or almost doubling how much sleep you get back each night and how much deeper you sleep just by calming the body
Yeah.
and understanding when the body's not
Amazing.
calm in sleep, right? And so if you're a woman with menopause and you don't want to take medication, or you're premenopausal, you don't want to take medication, this is a great tool that has a lot of benefit because it you can use it as much as you want and it doesn't have side effects that can really help get that sleep under control. Once the sleep's under control, a lot of the other symptoms of menopause start to get better, like anxiety and stress.
Absolutely, absolutely, and also the stress relieving functions of Apollo, I think, cannot be overstated. So I have speculated for a long time. And what we do know is that women who have high levels of stress or have had high levels of stress in their lives have more significant and severe menopausal and perimenopausal symptoms. So anything that we can, I mean, I always make the joke on the show that I tell my listeners, well, just relax to stop being stressed, to the point where I'm just like, oh my God, shut up. Like, give me some actual tools. So I love that you've created a tool that really requires no other thinking about it than to just put it somewhere on your body and set the schedule and to forget about it. So thank Catherine, you said Catherine, right? Yes, Catherine, and for having the issue of waking in the night. Because I have to say that I do enjoy the calm vibe, but I think the stay asleep is probably my favorite bit because I have noticed an uptick in my REM sleep for sure, because I do measure that as well as the increase in HRV.
Yeah, the release and development of that stay asleep feature was a completely life-changing feature because of how much it impacted our sleep and then the sleep of all those who were using it. I mean, it's been really astounding. And what's so neat about it is it's a really nice way to think about AI for the future, right? Like
Mm.
we think about AI a lot as generative AI, which is, writing essays for us or doing, data analysis and things like that, creating recommendations, but that is actually not as useful as using things like predictive AI to solve complex public health problems like unwanted middle of the night wake ups, right? So if you think of it, so it's really, we really wanted to create a model of what we call human centered technology. So rather than creating tools that we serve and technology that we serve and that creates more work for us, it's how do we create tools that serve us and solve our problems that we're struggling to solve without them. And similar to these guys, right? Like without these glasses,
Forget
I
it.
can barely see your face and I can't drive. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, I can put these on, I
Mhm.
forget they're there, and I
Mhm.
can do all of these things that I would be able to do if I could see perfectly without them.
Mhm.
And they're augmenting my intelligence, right? It's not artificial, it's augmenting intelligence and it's human centered because it has no side effects, it's easy to use, and it serves me, right?
Yes, and I love that repackaging of AI, because I'm going to guess you're of the generation like me. We watched the Terminator movie. We're thinking it's Skynet happening. Come on now. So this is good. This is
Yeah,
good.
we need to. I mean, it's up to us to repackage it, right?
Yeah.
Every single one of us. If we think about AI, AI is a tool. If we think about it from the perspective of destroying all humans, then we will create it to destroy all humans. And if we think about it, and if we make it, and the biggest threat to humans, by the way, on the earth is humans.
As humans, yeah.
So if we create and use artificial intelligence to recreate human intelligence,
Mhm.
we will recreate our destroyer, because the
Mhm.
thing that's destroying humans is humans,
Mhm.
right? So maybe we should be reframing this in terms of how do we think about creating technology that is augmenting us, that's serving us, that's like a teammate in
Yeah.
our life, rather than something that has the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of humans. That's not that interesting,
Mhm.
right? What's interesting is how do we actually create something that serves us and solves our problems more effectively and hopefully makes us healthier and better versions of ourselves.
Oh, I'll take it. I'll take it. That's a beautiful repackage. Thank you very much.
Of
And
course.
I consider myself I have this whole other thing I want to discuss with you, but I think we're going to have to do episode 2 some point down the road, okay? I want to hear about your research. And so when you've got some time to do that, I would invite you to come back to the show and teach us about that.
Well, sure, I would love that. And we talked a little bit about it with Apollo because that came out of, that's like
Okay.
13 clinical trials worth of research. So you got a little bit of it,
Okay.
which is that Apollo, which is that touch, even from Apollo, improves heart rate variability and vagal tone, and that improves the functioning of our recovery nervous system and therefore our whole mind body complex. So by doing that kind of soothing stuff, the research is showing that, whether it's with Apollo or breathing or touch from a pet or a loved one more often, whatever it is, the more we are soothing ourselves, the better our bodies and minds function, the better we feel, and the deeper sleep and rest we get. And
Mm.
so that is foundational to all of this. And then there's some other really interesting stuff we've published on around how psychedelics work and things like that we can talk about next time.
Yes, please. Yes, please. So I consider myself a better version of a human being after having had this conversation. So I thank you so much for sharing your Yoda-ness with us,
It's
for
my pleasure.
sharing what you've learned in your research with me and my listeners. And if people want to know more about you and about Apollo, Dr. David Rabin, where can they find you, please?
It was a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks so much for having me. And you can find me at my personal website is drdave.io. And you can also go to apollo.clinic. It'll take you to the same place. And you can find me on socials. I love to hear from you at Dr. David Rabin, Dr. David Rabin on Instagram and Twitter. And if or if you're interested in the psychedelic landscape and what's going on there, I would highly recommend checking out my shows on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which are called the Psychedelic Report, which is the psychedelic news, and then Your Brain Explained, which is sort of a more modern neuroscience understanding of consciousness and health for everyone, based on some of the latest discoveries we have and made in the field. And if you want to check out Apollo, please go to apolloneuro.com. And or if you can't remember that, you can go to wearablehugs.com, which is what the kids call it.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, thank you for that. I have a last question that I ask all my guests. And off the cuff, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I think I would tell my younger self to that, everything's going to be okay. Like everything's going to turn out okay. Um, I think I think a lot of us when we're really young, especially as teenagers, with all the stress of being a teenager and the expectations that society puts on us, we often spend a lot of time in our lives thinking that things aren't going to be okay, unless I do the following things or check the following boxes. And sometimes you check all the boxes and things still don't turn out the way you expected, but it doesn't mean they're not okay. Doesn't mean you're not gonna. It doesn't mean you're not gonna get through it. And I think that would have been the major thing that I would go back and tell myself, because so much anxiety and teenage angst just comes from that alone. You know.
Yes. 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 I do know what you're talking about. Unfortunately, perimenopause is like the same thing, except we got a bunch of responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is very much a
Exactly.
brain state, is what we're learning. Thank you, Dr. David Rabin. I so appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.